Hello from Hemmingford, everybody. I'm David Smith, Data Smith on Lichess, and welcome to a short report on round 5 of our current quads tournament. Today's video brought to you by the Monster Knight on f5. More on him later, but let's just say that Andres Toth would be very proud. Also brought to you by the English River in Hemmingford, which is what you're looking at, and the reason why the next time you're paired against me, you should come and play over the board instead of on Lichess. So as I record this, the World Chess Championship match has begun in Astana, Kazakhstan. And of course, as chess fans, a lot of us are disappointed that this match doesn't see the best players in the world facing off for the title. But of course, we all know that the best players are signed up for our quad tournament. So last night's games wound up play in sections D and E. Young Julian went undefeated in section E to win that group. He had 3.5 on 4. His first tournament victory in one of our events, but surely not his last. Congratulations, Julian. In section D, Carson Seagrebs ran away with the section by winning all 5 of his games. Competition a bit lower down the table was a bit tighter. Unlike the good old days of our Swiss events, there's just no such thing as an easy round anymore. On the other hand, every game gets to be pretty interesting. For sections A, B, and C, there's still a round remaining, and in each of those cases, it's not totally clear who's going to collect the prize money. So in one of our tournaments last year, we offered a series of prizes for games in different categories like most instructive game or bitterest lesson learned and so on. And watching the game last night between Sauerbaum, that's Gus, and E3 engineer, Paul, I was tempted to invent a new prize for gutsiest move after white played N takes G7. The whole game is worth looking at, and I will put a link to it in the video notes, but I would like to show you just one position here. So what we're looking at is the position after Black's 17th move. And this comes out of a closed Spanish or a Ruy Lopez. And the positions that come out of that opening are usually very complex, and this one is not an exception. Essentially, there's a battle for the center that's carried out mostly by the pawns on either side. And the middle game is a way of finding ways of activating your pieces and getting around the enemy pawns, but also getting around your own pawns, because all of those pawns in the center tend to clog things up and make it a bit difficult to get your pieces really mobile. So here we meet our sponsor again, the Knight on G5, the Monster Knight on G5 as it's known. There's the old saying in chess, get your knight to e5 and the win will just come on its own. Maybe a little bit simplistic as an analysis, but we can see some of what's happening, some of what the truth behind that in this position. Essentially here, Gus, the player of the white pieces, decides to sacrifice his f5 Monster Knight on G7. And now, let's be clear, this is not a sacrifice that is the beginning of the first move of a 3 or 4 mate puzzle. This is a different kind of sacrifice. It's essentially a positional sacrifice. So Gus is sacrificing material for intangibles. They're intangibles, but they're nevertheless real advantages. A bit like the second round draft pick that a hockey team might get in return for a star player. Now, of course, the most immediate advantage is going to be the opening of the G file, and so we can see it happening here. So after knight takes G7, the king recaptures, and white immediately advances to G5. Black has to retreat the knight. White captures a pawn here, and then black hides in the corner. All right, so clearly white has gained something for his sacrifice. He's gained the open G file with the potential to bring other pieces over to that side and carry on the attack. On the other hand, black has access to that G file as well, and his king, even though a little bit vulnerable, is nevertheless also a little bit hidden behind the white pawn at H6. And you can see here very clearly the case where if white had no pawn on H6 and no pawn on E4, for instance, white's attack would quickly become pretty overwhelming. But in this case, white's own pawns are obstructing him a little bit. One of the other intangible things about this, or intangible advantages that white's acquired here, is that even though there's not an immediate mating attack, black is going to spend a lot of the rest of the game, and there is a lot of game left to go because there's still a lot of pieces on the board, all the major pieces. Black still has 4 minor pieces. White has just given up the knight. But that means there's a lot of middle game to go. And during that whole middle game, black is going to be living with a king that is somewhat vulnerable and is going to have to invest energy and time in making sure that there's no surprises on the king side from white. And of course, that energy and time is energy and time not invested in attacking white. And so essentially, Sauerbaum, or Gus, has made the calculation, or made the judgment. He's not calculating, let's be clear. Gus has not calculated 20 moves in advance here, but he's making the judgment that these intangibles will be compensation enough for the piece, and that he'll either win back the material, hopefully with interest, or he'll acquire some other concrete advantage that he can take into the endgame. Maybe even more important is the fact that white is taking complete control of the initiative with this move, and he's dictating where and how the outcome of the game will be decided. And of course, we all know from experience that this is a non-trivial psychological advantage. Realizing that it's your opponent dictating to you what's going to happen next is a challenge. It's challenged psychologically to find good moves and to defend against that. Now, to be able to make this kind of judgment, though, it requires a very good feel for the value of these different dynamic factors in a position. I could play knight takes g7, but I would have no idea whether this was just a giving away material for nothing, or in fact something meaningful. And I guess that's why Gus is playing in section A and I'm playing in section D. It certainly takes creativity to find such moves, a lot of courage to play them, and nerves to follow through. Now, just to relieve the suspense, I should tell you that over the next 20 moves, black defends pretty carefully and progressively trades off more and more pieces. But white was still able to use the vulnerability of the black king to recover the sacrificed material. So this is the position now, 20 moves later. So you can see that there's a lot fewer pieces on the board. Black's managed to get the rooks off, as well as another set of minor pieces. But you see that the black king is still under a certain level of threat. Those white bishops hold a lot of potential. I emphasize the use of the word potential because, again, we still see that each of those bishops is being a little bit blocked by their own pawns. But at this point, white does manage to find a way to activate those pieces and plays this next move, h7 check. Black goes into the corner and then is checked again by the queen. Black has no choice now but to capture the pawn on h7. And finally, 22 moves after the original knight sacrifice, white recaptures a minor piece with check here. Black's obligated to move, and white will recapture the bishop on d6. So it's pretty impressive, really, to see Gus having essentially made correct judgments about the value of that knight sacrifice on g7. In the end, the players went into a pretty much even endgame, and even though white tried a whole bunch of different ways of provoking little mistakes from black, after 70 moves, the game concluded in a draw. So we'll just end with a little quote from a former world champion, Boris Spassky, champion between 1969 and 1972, who is mostly famous for losing to Bobby Fischer in Reykjavik in 1972. But the quote is apropos, given what we've just seen about being willing to take risks in order to keep the initiative. Boris Spassky once said, "A man who is willing to commit suicide has the initiative." So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next week.